Hello, welcome to the first proper lecture in mountain sports. Uh, the topic is a short history of mountain sports. So I always uh, do my lectures as questions followed by answers. And so the first question I'm going to ask myself is mountains and humans. What is the history before alpinism? So before I answer that question, how people got into the mountains, I first have a look at the different types of mountain sports. So here's mountain sports, and then we can divide it into climbing, into mountaineering, and mountain endurance sports. And this is not totally complete, but it shows you some of the most important mountain sports. So if you look into climbing, we have indoor climbing, and actually indoors you don't actually have a mountain, you just have some plastic on some wood. And so this is one thing. It's developed as an independent sport. Then you have summer climbing, and so summer climbing can be bouldering, which is just pieces of rock where you do a couple of moves. You can have sports climbing. So sports climbing, the rock is bolted. You put bolts into the rock, so it's very safe. So you can climb very hard. And then you have trud climbing. And trud climbing is that you don't put bolts into the rock, but you have to use your own equipment. So usually you can't climb quite as hard because you need to put the safety equipment in, like nuts or friends. So this is the classical climbing. And then you can do winter climbing. So, and in winter climbing, you have ice axes and you have crampons, and you can do dry tooling, so which is winter climbing in summer. So you use this equipment that you typically use in winter to climb in summer, and you use the ice axes to hook on rocks and to pull yourself up. Then you can do mixed climbing. So mixed climbing is not just climbing on ice, but it is climbing on frozen turf, grass, and then a little bit of ice, and you hook on rock, and so you're climbing winter cliffs, which are not all ice. And then you have ice climbing, where you have an ice fall and you put ice screws in, and you climb that ice fall. So the second big area is mountaineering. So here you have aid or big wall climbing, like El Cap, which is a huge face, 1,000 meters high, and you have special techniques to get up there. Sometimes you actually use technical equipment to pull yourself up, which would be aid climbing. If you climb it free without technical equipment, then you do it like a sports climb. And then we have alpine mountaineering, and this is sort of climbing big peaks in the Alps. So either you do that in the Alps or in similar ranges, or you go to extreme altitude. And then it might be by fair means, so that you don't use artificial oxygen or siege tactics, or you do it, as you might call it, aided. So where you use supplementary oxygen to essentially make it easier, because the physiology at very high altitudes above 8,000 meters is against you. So with oxygen, it's much easier. You might use bolts, or you might use siege tactics, where you build lots of camps and then force your way to the top. So, and then the last group of sports is mountain endurance sports. So here we have, I use the German term wandern or hiking, and then hill walking. Then you might have mountain running. There are different versions of it. And with equipment, you might have ski touring or mountain biking. So overall, mountaineering is a sport or activity of climbing mountains. And mountain sports is a broader term, and that includes all sports done in a mountain environment. So piste skiing, base jumping, as well as mountaineering related sports. For example, given indoor bouldering, there's no mountain inside. The mountain might be 100 kilometers away, but you essentially climb when you're bouldering, and so it's mountaineering related. Okay, so let's go back to the question, which was, so how did people actually get into mountain environment? So this is a picture of the world, and it shows human evolution from the point where people got out of Africa. So this is shown here, and they estimate that people left Africa 55,000 to 65,000 years ago. And then people, as you know, modern humans went all over the world. Interestingly also, there are some humans, so these archaic humans, and they're either the Neanderthalers or the Denisovans. They left Africa early, and so let me read here. So these archaic humans occupied the Tibetan plateau well before that. So before our main grandmothers and granddads arrived on the Tibetan plateau at high altitudes of 3,000 or 4,000 meters, these Denisovans, which are archaic humans, so they're different human species, they're like Neanderthalers, so they were already living in the human plateau. So this shows a mandible, so a bit of a jaw from Bashir Kar's cave at 3,280 meters altitude, which they then dated 160,000 years ago. And so this is from a Denisovan, and they found it at over 3,000 meter altitude. And so that happens 100,000 years ago, before our main grandfathers and granddads left Africa. So this shows, I mean, human species have been living at high altitude for a very long time, so perhaps even 160,000 years ago. So, and then there's another paper in Science in 2018. And so one of the high altitude areas on this planet is the Tibetan Plateau, which is between 3,000 and 4,000 meters. And you see here where the little triangle is, there was a population of people. And this is the Nia Devu area, and it's 4,600 meters high. So it's almost like the altitude of Mont Blanc. And they estimated that humans, so probably Denisovans, lived there from 40 to 30,000 years ago. So the conclusion is humans lived at high altitude for a very long time. Probably most of you will know Ötzi. So Ötzi is a human who was found in 1998, a corpse, and it's a Tyrolean iceman. And he was found at 3,200 meters, so he probably wasn't living there, but he was walking around there, and dated to be a 5,300-year-old Copper Age individual. And here's the image of the cadaver, and the DNA sequence matches best individuals from Corsica and Sardinia. So he was lactose intolerant, which suggests he wasn't adapted to drinking milk, and had brown eyes. And so 5,000 years ago, people were up to 3,000 meters in the Alps and were walking around there. And these people probably came or were related to people from Corsica and Sardinia. So people went into the mountains quite early on. I mean, from my perspective, I can fully understand that people want to go to the mountains because they're just so beautiful. But they might have their reasons to go into the mountain, because it is a space which is not inhabited, and maybe you find certain foods there or other things, and so this is why people went to the mountain. And then also people went to mountains and cliffs for a purpose. So, for example, given there was warfare, Hannibal went over the Alps, so that is some sort of mountaineering. Then also there was an attack on Edinburgh Castle where people had to do some climbing. Then people do climbing and go to the Alps for food. Or on St. Kilda. St. Kilda is some island with very steep cliffs where the inhabitants were trying to get eggs from the seabirds. Then they might go into the mountains for religious reasons or for scientific research. So all these are reasons to go in the mountains, but the reasons are not sport. They're always for a specific purpose, and not just for sports, for exercise, for recreation. So they always had a purpose when they went to the mountains, either to live there, to do war, for religion, for food, or for scientific research. So, and this is then also the answer to the first question. So, what is the history before alpinism? So, archaic humans lived above 3,000 meters from 160,000 years ago, and above 4,500 meters from 40 to 30,000 years ago. And since then, since these early days, thousands and thousands of years ago, humans always went into the mountains for specific purposes, like warfare, hunting, religion, and scientific research. And so this was the first phase of mountain sports, and the next phase is the phase where actually humans went into the mountain for sports. So this is connected to the following question: what is the history of alpinism and extreme altitude mountaineering? So here's an overview. Many people view the ascent of Mont Blanc as the start of classic alpinism. So people went into the mountains earlier, but really as a sport, as a challenge to get on top of mountains or to climb mountains. So they always view this ascent of Mont Blanc. Mont Blanc is 4,809 meters high. It's the highest in the European Alps. And so it was 1786, and it was by Jacques Balmat and Michel Gabriel Paccard. So go to Chamonix, you find out all about it. In 1865 then, Ed Whymper and partners climbed the Matterhorn, which was a very challenging peak for the time. It's not as high as the Mont Blanc, it's 4,478 meters. And this is really classic alpinism, it's a main ascent. And then, so people started to climb all the main peaks of the Alps. So at the beginning, the focus was the summit. And then actually people discovered the technical aspects of climbing. So it wasn't always the goal to go on a summit by the easiest route, but the goal was then to climb something which was quite hard to climb. And I think few things were harder for their time than in 1938, the north face of the Eiger, when two teams combined. The Eiger is not even 4,000 meters, it's 3,967. And this is what you might call performance alpinism. So, and it's by Heinrich Harrer, Fritz Kasparek, Anders Heckmeyer, and Vigal Förg. So a combination between Austrian and German teams. And this is also connected to Munich, because Munich was one of the cities where this sort of performance alpinism, where the difficulty of the climb was important, where this really developed. Another big ascent at the time is a walker spur at the Grand Jurasse by Cassin, Esposito, and Tizione. So these are really very hard routes. I mean, even today, getting up the north face of the Eiger is not a simple thing. And then from there on, from this performance alpinism, it developed into speed alpinism. That's one thing by Uli Steck, who died trying to speed climb in the Himalayas. And so, while these guys haven't taken days to get up the north face of the Eiger, Uli Steck managed to do it in 2 hours, 22 minutes. And the record has, I think, improved since. Another thing is then to really do this sort of alpinism, so where you climb with little aid and try really to do technically hard routes. And this has been also taken to the bigger ranges like the Himalayas. And so one example of a climb where you do this performance alpinism in the greater ranges is Mick Fowler and Paul Ramsden climbing in 2012 the Brow of Shiva. But there was also another strand which was then going to extreme altitude after sort of the golden age and the silver age of alpinism. And this was 1855. There's a mountain in Kamet, I think it's also in the Himalaya, and the Schlag and White brothers, they reached a height of 6,785 meters. And so from this first expedition into high altitude, then we have the 1953 Mount Everest ascent with supplementary oxygen by Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. And then also sort of from a German perspective, German-Austrian perspective, the 1953 ascent by Nanga Parbat by Hermann Buhl certainly stands out. I mean, this mountain had cost many lives, and it was expedition style, but a very long solo, also aided by some drugs. And this is really clearly a classical climb in the Himalayas. Then 1978, Reinhold Messner and Peter Haberle climbed Mount Everest alpine style without oxygen, and that is clearly a major achievement because all the physiologists thought it wasn't possible to go on top of Mount Everest. They thought you get brain problems when you do that, and they really went into the unknown and demonstrated that it was possible. And then from here, again, we combine it with technicality. So this is again the great pro of Shiva. And then in 2012, then the technicality, maybe that's not the main thing, but also the time that people spend at altitude. I think one of the top achievements was the Mazino Ridge on Nanga Parbat by Sandy Allen and Rick Allen, and this took ages to do it, I think nearly 14 days. And these are not the youngest mountaineers, but I think they, with their achievement and without oxygen, they managed to climb Nanga Parbat, and few people thought that was possible. And this is for me one of the standout achievements in extreme altitude mountaineering. So let's go into detail after the introduction. So the start of classic alpinism is the ascent of Mont Blanc in 4,000, which is 4,809 meters in 1786. And in 1760, Horace Benedict de Saussure offered a prize for the first ascent of Mont Blanc. And on the 8th of August 1786, Jacques Balmat and the Dr. Michel Gabriel Paccard, they then ascended Mont Blanc. So here is a drawing of the time, and you see they have the long alpenstocks, and they don't worry too much about the crevasses in the glacier, and they managed to get on top. And whilst other peaks have been ascended before, the first ascent is considered as the start of modern alpinism, where mountains are climbed as a challenge and for sport, and they're not climbed because for scientific experiment or so, or for warfare or to find some food. This is now when alpinism became a sport. So the golden age of alpinism was when then this became and spread, and the idea to do sports in the Alps. And Britain was really very important there because the rich boys of Britain quite often went on a European tour. And if you come from Britain and want to go into Italy and see all the classical ruins and drawings and things like that, you have to cross the Alps. And a lot of people thought, well, this doesn't look too bad. So the Alps became a stop on the grand tours of upper-class young British men. And then there are books, The High Alps by Wills, then Peaks, Passes and Glaciers by Ball, then The Alps as the Playground of Europe by Stephen, and The Western Alps by Ball. So these are all books, and then you can imagine you're sitting at home in London, it's very foggy, raining a lot, and you read about these amazing adventures in the Alps. And if you're a young upper-class British man, this is what you have to do. And then this is the golden age of alpinism, when people went out to the Alps and did mountaineering as a sport. And it's a period of many major first ascents, from the Wetterhorn to the Matterhorn by Whymper. And it was especially British gentlemen climbers, combined with local guides who knew what to do and where to go, that did these ascents. And as you see here, there's a specific literature, and also Thomas Cook holidays from 1861. They organized these trips. And there's also the Alpine Club in London, which is the first mountaineering club in the world, founded in 1857. So this is a golden age of alpinism. So here you see a scene of that. Here you see these gentlemen discussing what sporting endeavors could be done in the mountains around there. And they discussed it with local guides. And this is members of the Alpine Club in front of Hotel Monte Rosa in Zermatt. That's from Edward Whymper in 1864. So after Mont Blanc, the next standout achievement was the Matterhorn in 1865 by Ed Whymper. But it was a tragic achievement. So here's an image of the first ascent, and they got on top, and with lots of fantasy, is this how they reached the summit. And then actually there was an accident on the way down, and here you see the rope snapping and some of the party falling down the Matterhorn. So this was on the 14th of July 1865, the first ascent of the Matterhorn by Ed Whymper, Lord Francis Douglas, Charles Hudson, Douglas Hadow, Michel Croz, Peter Taugwalder, and some. And so you see the local guys with the British climbers combined. And Croz, Hadow, Hudson, and Douglas fell during the descent down the north face of the Matterhorn. And after the end of the golden age of alpinism, the golden age when the major 4,000ers in the Alps, or major peaks in the Alps, were climbed, there was a silver age of alpinism from 1865 to 1882, where the less well-known peaks were ascended. So and then things moved on towards more technical climbing. And here Munich really plays an important role, because the students in Munich in those days, like today, wanted to have some adventure. And with the Alps being 1 hour away from Munich, it was the place to have that adventure. And I think the standout personality is Hans Döfer. So Hans Döfer climbed especially on the Wilde Kaiser. And so he didn't want just to get on top of the Wilde Kaiser. I mean, the Wilde Kaiser is a little bit, the Elmore height is, I think, 2,400 meters. So compared to the big peaks in the Western Alps, which are over 4,000 meters, that wasn't a challenge. But what was a challenge is to climb these big walls in the Wilde Climber. So here is actually the Totenkirche Westwand. So I've climbed with this friend Arno Alpi, and here you actually see two climbers. And even if you have maximum magnification of this, you hardly see these climbers. So this is a huge wall. And imagine this guy, Hans Döfer, with his partner, they climbed this in 1913, so before the First World War. And so this truly changed climbing from just getting on top of mountains to really technical rock climbing. So this is very important. And so there was quite a bit of a debate. So Hans Döfer was happy to swing about on mountains, so on a rope, to try to get another line where he could carry on climbing. And he had a debate with Paul Preuss, who debated the ethics of free versus aid climbing. So it's known as a Mauerhakenstreit. And so Paul Preuss really wanted to do free climbing, ideally solo climbing, whereas Hans Döfer mainly climbed free. But he was also happy if, the climbing wasn't possible anymore, so that there was the end of a crack. He was happy to put a piton in and then to swing about 10 meters to the left to then go on another line where he could carry on climbing. And so this is the move towards technical climbing. Well, this is actually us on the route. So this is the Döfer Totenkirche Westwand. It's a nose traverse. And I couldn't help it, but I had to show this picture because this is Arno and me climbing. So that's me actually doing the famous nose traverse. So here's the nose on the route. But in contrast to Döfer's time, you have a bolt here. Then you have a little bit of rope here, and there's a bolt somewhere here where you can clip in. So you can climb this fairly safely. But you also climb this. This is one of the Döfer traverses, because once you reach this point, you can carry on climbing more easily. because here to the right where Arno was standing, he was running out essentially of climbable rock. Well, it's climbable for some people, but not for people of Dülfer's time. And so what Dülfer had done is he has been swinging on a rope, so he put a piton in and then swung on a rope to get here. And today actually you can climb it free. It's very balancy climbing. You see there are not many holes, but it's even for a climber without loads of talent like myself, it's possible to somehow get across to this point here. So then Dülfer did mainly rock climbing, but then there are also really hard alpine climbs. And the most famous, of course, is the Eiger Nordwand. And so the British climbers were still, or at least some of them were still focused on getting on top of peaks, and they thought technicality wasn't really worth it. And so this is expressed by this quote by Lieutenant Colonel Edward Lyle Strutt, 1874 to 1948, the president of the Alpine Club, in his final talk. The Eiger Wand, still unscaled, continues to be an obsession for the mentally deranged of almost every nation. He who first succeeds may rest assured that he has accomplished the most imbecile variant since mountaineering first began. So you see, Edward Lyle Strutt was still stuck in the golden age of alpinism, whereas elsewhere things had moved on and the technicality of the climb became the interesting bit, to climb things which other people couldn't climb, to climb as hard as possible. And the north face of the Eiger, of course, was the big challenge. If you're in Grindelwald, it just stares in your face and says, climb me if you dare. So, and you've probably heard about the horror shows on the north face of the Eiger. And so it was actually called at one stage the Eiger Mordwand, so the murder wall, because there were lethal attempts, for example, given by Sedelmeier and Mehringer, and by Kurz, Angerer, and Reiner. And there are lots of books about it, which make fantastic reading. And so on the 24th of July 1938, Andreas Heckmeyer, Ludwig Wörk, Heinrich Harrer, and Fritz Kasparek managed to do the first ascent. So there were originally two teams of climbers, but then they joined forces and they got on top. And Heckmeyer used 12-point crampons, so they had proper winter climbing gear. And it's still a hard climb. I was told it's Scottish 6, if you know about Scottish winter climbing grades, so nothing that is too easy. And this was before the Second World War. And then people moved out to the greater ranges, like especially the Himalayas. So so the countries had their own mountains. So for example, if Mount Everest was the focus of the British, K2 initially was a focus of the Italians, and Nanga Parbat was a focus of the Germans and Austrians. So here you see an expedition on the left with George Mallory, and he died during ascent and was found later at 8,125 meters. And actually, people don't know whether he managed to reach the summit or not, but he died during the expedition. Because I've been many years in Scotland and I'm a member of the Scottish Mountaineering Club, I also have to remember that there is Harold Rayburn, one of the top Scottish climbers in history, shown here, is also in this photo. And although it was sort of considered to be the British mountain, there was a Swiss expedition in 1952, and they reached nearly 8,600 meters, so very close to the summit, and they gathered important information for the 1953 British expedition. And then on the 29th of May 1953, Mount Everest was ascended by Sherpa Tenzing Norgay. He was a very experienced and very well-performing Sherpa, and Edward Hillary. And there are tons of films and books about it. And they did expedition style with supplementary oxygen. So the German 8,000 meter peak was Nanga Parbat. so German-Austrian peak, and there were German expeditions in 1932 and 1934 and 1937. So, and these expeditions had a bad fate, for example, given 16 deaths in an avalanche during the 1937 expedition. So it was a Schicksalsberg, the fate mountain, and always things seem to go wrong. And on the 3rd of July 1953, Hermann Buhl did the first ascent to Nanga Parbat. And this is really one of the great achievements in alpine or mountaineering history. It was a 41-hour solo without oxygen. But it has to be said, it took the stimulant Pervitin. I mean, there was no doping testing, there was no doping list, but still he had some medical, he took a drug that helped him. And there were disagreements with Herrlinkoffer, who led the expedition. So, but this clearly was an outstanding achievement to do this as a solo climb. And then, so the big challenge is, okay, so how should we actually climb mountains? And is an ascent of 8,000 meters peaks with artificial oxygen, is it, I mean, why not just take a helicopter up? You use a technical aid to get on top, yeah? I mean, where do you draw the line? And so then the question was it possible actually to climb Mount Everest without oxygen? And the physiologists at the time thought it wasn't possible. The physiologists actually said you might get brain damage, or you simply don't have enough of a high VO2 max to actually exercise on top of Mount Everest. And you need to exercise because you need to walk and go up the hill. And so on the 8th of May 1978, in the spring climbing season, Reinhold Messner and Peter Habele demonstrated to everyone that it was possible to climb Mount Everest without oxygen. And so this also signaled the progression from an expedition style where you use a lot of technique and equipment to get on top of a mountain, like artificial oxygen, like lots of tents on the way, like fixed ropes, to a modern alpine style where you stand at the bottom of the mountain, you pack your rucksack, and off you go with no artificial oxygen. So, and this then developed, and also in the Himalayas, climbs become more and more technical, and you can push it. Then it's not only to get on top of an 8,000 meter peak, but also the route. And so for me, one of the most outstanding achievements in all mountaineering is the ascent of the Mazino Ridge. So what you see here is Nanga Parbat. This should be the summit, and this is the Mazino Ridge. It's 13 kilometers long. It has 8 subsidiary peaks, and it ends on Nanga Parbat. And in 2012, after completing the ridge with a larger team, Sandy Allen and Rick Allen, 2 Scottish climbers, summited Nanga Parbat on the 15th of July 2012. The climb took, hold your breath, 19 days. So it means these guys stayed 19 days at a very high altitude with limited food. They actually couldn't produce water for, I think, 1 or 2 days at the end. And they climbed alpine style with no artificial oxygen. So if you ever want to have a horror show of a climb, this is highly recommended. And as you see, they're not spring chicken. So they're both in their late 50s, I think, when they climbed it. And they had a lot of experience, and that experience and the sheer will to hang in there till they reach the summit enabled them to do something where a lot of top Himalayan mountaineers actually didn't achieve. So, okay, so there we are. I've covered now climbing. I've covered the golden age, the silver age of alpinism, and everything that follows after, and the things that went before. And so now we've reached 2020, we have COVID-19, but there are also some big questions in alpinism, and I've listed some here. So one big question is, how can we better protect the mountain environment? So I don't know whether you can see it, but this is tents and this is rubbish there. So when people do these high altitude expeditions, some are like Thomas Cook, like a package holiday. And so you have people dragging you on top of the mountain, you leave a lot of junk, and there's overcrowding. I think a lot of you will have seen the picture where you had all these people near the summit of Mont Blanc. And then you see all the ski infrastructure in the Alps where there's a lot of metal on a mountain. And well, there's one adage about mountaineering is leave no trace. And today people leave a lot of trace. And so for me, there's an important question: how can we better protect the mountain environment? What should we allow to be done to a mountain? Are mountain huts okay? Is all the skiing infrastructure okay? Can we leave rubbish on the mountains like people do in the Himalayas? So this is an important question. The second important question to me is, what are the rules of the mountaineering game? So there's no competition climbing on plastic holds, which I love. I don't do competitions, but I love the climbing on plastic holds. We have fantastic climbing walls and bouldering halls here in Munich. Should we allow oxygen, or is oxygen essentially doping in mountaineering? Another aid, should we just climb the rock and what we find in front of us? Or should we be using things to pull ourselves up the mountain? Then there's over-bolting. So bolting involves using a drill, putting a hole in there, and then you put a bolt in there so you can clip into the mountain. And the whole commercialization, so what's acceptable? And so here's Reinhold Messner, Murder of the Impossible. It's one of the books he's written, and so he's discussing these issues. Then the other thing is, how much risk is actually acceptable? So there's solo climbing, like Alex Honnold climbed free rider on El Cap. Surely huge risk of death, because I think if that goes wrong, it's a hard climb, a very long climb. If a rock falls or you slip, I mean, he would have fallen hundreds of meters. Is that acceptable? Maybe for you, but what about your family? Is it ethical? And here we saw David Lana, Ross Kelly, and others, and so they got killed in an avalanche in Canada. And so actually what some people estimate, that the death rate among Hans-Jörg Auer, of course, that the death rate among top alpinists is 50%. So 50% of the top alpinists seem to die when they do these amazing climb that they can do today, because there's simply some factors in the mountains, like avalanches, like seracs breaking off and so on, like the weather changing, that there's a huge risk involved in really hardcore alpinism. And is that acceptable? Yeah, I mean, a lot of other things, if you go on the motorway, I mean, you can go at a certain speed, because if you go too fast, it's considered that the risk is too high for you and for others. Yeah, and so what is a risk that is acceptable in such a sport? Then the other thing is, how can we responsibly use the mountains for commercial activities, outdoor equipment, climbing walls, ski resort, tourism. Yeah, we want to make money with mountains and mountain sports and mountaineering. And so how can we do that responsibly? So connected to this question as well. Yeah, so here are some examples shown. So the infamous compressor route on Cerro Torre, where they had a whole compressor to put holes into the mountain. 8 climbing via ferrata, where they put ladders. Yeah, should we not just take away those ladders and climb it free? But on the other hand, these people have a great time, enjoy climbing the mountain on a ladder. 8 climbing with the oxygen. Yeah, is oxygen like doping? 8 climbing when we have these axes on dry rock, and so is this all a murder of the impossible, as Reinhold Messner writes? Yeah, there's some more images here. So this is Everest Base Camp and a lot of rubbish. This is the overcrowding on some of the high climbs. This is the rubbish on I don't know what hill, what climb it is. I think it's Mount Everest. And then actually you have all these corpses on there. So this corpse is known as Green Boots, and it's used as a waypoint on the mountain. So is that all acceptable? So where do things go? So this is now the end. The question was, what is the history of alpinism and extreme altitude mountaineering? So alpinism or mountaineering focuses on the challenge of climbing mountains and is linked to sports. And so first was Mont Blanc, and then we had the Golden Age with the ascent of the Matterhorn as the standout achievement. And post the Golden Age, there was a Silver Age and became more technical. So it was Dülfer was one who climbed big faces in summer in the Alps. The ascent of the Eiger Nordwand is a standout achievement. Then also the first ascent of Mount Everest with oxygen, Hermann Buhl's ascent of Nanga Parbat. And then the Maseno Ridge is really a hardcore sufferfest, which Sandy Allen and Rick Allen managed to climb. So here are some references. So this is by Ken Crockett, Mountaineering in Scotland. I'm a member of the Scottish Mountaineering Club, so I love Scottish mountaineering history. Then there is the book about the Himalaya, where you find Himalayan history. And then this is a good book, but in German, is Faszination Berg, the history of alpinism. And I recommend these books to you. So, and that's us on the Dülfer Fleischbank. And here's Arno, and here's another team below. And it's one of the fantastic climbs and shows what great fun mountain climbing can be. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this lecture.